Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Before we start today's story, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and help us reach 10,000 followers so we can bring you even more heartfelt dramas like this one. Tonight's story takes us into a storm, not only the one outside, but also the one inside Tieu Nu's heart. It's been months since Truong disappeared without a trace. Many said he had left the city. Others whispered he no longer cared. But Tieu Nu refused to believe it. On a dark, stormy night, rain poured like an endless curtain, blurring the streets and soaking her thin coat. Her umbrella broke long ago, yet she kept walking, one step at a time, through the flooded roads. Each step carried a name on her lips, Truong. She wandered from alley to alley, clutching a small photograph. His smile, frozen in time, became her only compass. The wind howled, lightning flashed, and her heart trembled, but she didn't stop. People told her to give up. "He's gone," they said. "You can't fight fate." But Tieu Nu's love wasn't something the storm could wash away. By morning, she was exhausted. Her shoes were soaked, her hands numb. She entered a small cafe to rest, staring at the rain through the window. On the table lay a stack of leaflets she had printed earlier that day, each one showing Truong's face with the words, "Missing. Please help me find him." Tieu Nu gathered them, whispering to herself, "If he's still somewhere out there, he'll see this. He has to." And so, with trembling hands and a heart full of hope, she stepped back into the rain, unaware that this day would lead her closer to the truth, a truth she wasn't ready to face. The rain refused to stop. It poured down endlessly, as if the sky itself shared Tieu Nu's despair. With soaked clothes clinging to her skin and trembling hands holding the stack of leaflets, she walked from one street to another, posting Truong's picture wherever she could. Electric poles, bus stops, and walls covered with advertisements. "Have you seen this man?" she asked each passerby, with hope shining faintly in her eyes. But most people just shook their heads, hurrying past her to escape the storm. Tieu Nu's voice began to crack. Every rejection cut deeper than the last. Her world felt heavier with every unanswered question. Still, she whispered to herself, "If I stop now, he'll never know I'm still waiting." At the corner of an old market, she approached a small vegetable stall. The elderly vendor looked up, her wrinkled face softening when she saw the young woman drenched in rain. "Child, you'll catch a cold," the woman said kindly. Tieu Nu bowed her head slightly. "Please, ma'am, do you know where I can find a photocopy shop nearby?" The old woman pointed down the road, smiling faintly. "3 turns ahead, but hurry. The owner closes early when it rains." "Thank you," Tieu Nu replied, her voice trembling with gratitude. She rushed toward the shop. The little bell chimed as she entered, and the warmth inside fogged her vision. "Can you print these?" she asked the shopkeeper, handing over Truong's photo. The man looked at her, hesitating. "It'll cost more. The storm's caused a power surge." Tieu Nu froze for a second. Her wallet was almost empty, the last bills folded neatly inside. But without a second thought, she handed them over. "Please, just print them." A few minutes later, she stood outside, clutching the damp posters to her chest as the rain returned, heavier than before. The photos blurred slightly, but the face, that familiar smile, still shone through. She took a deep breath and whispered, "You'll come back to me, won't you?" And then, just as lightning flashed across the sky, she froze. A Across the street, in the crowd rushing under umbrellas, a man stopped. His posture, his face, that same way he tilted his head. Her heart skipped a beat. "Truong?" she breathed. The man turned for a moment. Their eyes almost met before he disappeared into the sea of people. Tieu Nu's world spun. Could it really be him? Or just a cruel trick of the storm? Tieu Nu's heartbeat thundered louder than the storm itself. Her feet moved before her mind could think, splashing through puddles, bumping into strangers, her breath trembling as she shouted, "Truong, wait!" But the crowd swallowed her voice. The rain drowned it out, each drop pounding like a cruel reminder of how far she had fallen. The man's figure, blurred under the flickering streetlights, turned the corner and vanished. She ran harder. Her soaked shoes slipped on the slick pavement, but she didn't stop. The cold air cut through her lungs as she turned onto the narrow alley. And there, at the end of it, she saw him again. He was standing beneath a broken neon sign, his back turned, the light flickering on and off like a heartbeat. "Truong," she whispered, almost afraid to believe her own eyes. He didn't move. She stepped closer, each sound of her footsteps echoing in the silence. "It's really you, isn't it?" Slowly, the man turned. The sight of him made her freeze, the same familiar face, but colder, thinner, and shadowed with exhaustion. Why didn't you come back?" she asked, tears mixing with the rain. For a long moment, Truong just looked at her. Then he said quietly, "Tieu Nu, you shouldn't have come." His voice, the same gentle tone she remembered, carried pain now. "There are things you don't understand. I didn't want you to get involved." "What are you talking about?" she cried. "Do you know what I've been through to find you?" He turned away, his fists clenched. "I didn't disappear because I wanted to. I had to protect you." Lightning flashed, illuminating the truth in his eyes, guilt, sorrow, and something darker. "Protect me from what?" she demanded, her voice breaking. Before he could answer, a black car stopped at the end of the alley. Two men stepped out, dressed in dark coats, their faces unreadable. Truong's expression hardened immediately. "Tieu Nu," he said urgently, "you have to go, now." She shook her head violently. "No, I won't leave again, not until you tell me the truth." The men approached quickly and Truong grabbed her wrist. "Please, trust me this one last time." The storm raged louder, wind howling through the alley. One of the men shouted, "Truong, we need to talk, now." Tieu Nu's heart raced. "Who are they?" Truong looked at her, eyes full of anguish. "The reason I left." And before she could say another word, he pushed her behind a stack of crates. "Stay hidden." He turned toward the men, the sound of the rain muffling their low, urgent conversation. Through the downpour, she could only make out fragments. "She wasn't supposed to find you. The deal's off if they see her. You'll have to choose." Her hands shook. What deal? What secret was Truong hiding? Then one of the men looked in her direction. Tieu Nu held her breath. Her heart stopped. The storm had brought her to him. But now it might tear them apart again. The wind howled through the narrow alley as the rain slammed down like 1,000 tiny daggers. Tieu Nu crouched behind the crates, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Every breath was shallow. Every sound felt too loud. Truong stood only a few meters away, facing the two men in black coats. His voice was low, urgent, but sharp with defiance. I told you I'm done with this. I'm not part of your plan anymore." One of the men, tall with a scar across his cheek, smirked. "You don't get to walk away that easily, Truong. You owe us, and if you can't pay, she will." Tieu Nu froze. "She?" Her blood ran cold. Truong took a step forward, his voice firm. "Don't touch her. She has nothing to do with this." The second man laughed bitterly. "Nothing to do with it? She's the reason you backed out of the deal in the first place. Don't pretend she's innocent." Rain dripped down Truong's face as he clenched his fists. "If you go near her, I swear." "Or what?" The scarred man interrupted, stepping closer. "You'll fight us in the middle of the street. You think you can protect her forever." Tieu Nu's mind spun. What deal? What was he hiding from her? The storm roared around them, but inside her chest, the noise was worse, a deafening mix of betrayal and confusion. Then the tall man glanced in her direction, his eyes narrowing. "She's here, isn't she?" Truong's expression flickered for a split second, just enough for the man to know. "Find her," he barked. Before they could move, Truong lunged. He punched the first man hard, sending him stumbling into a puddle. "Run, Tieu Nu," he shouted. She hesitated only for a second before breaking into a sprint. Her legs burned, her lungs screamed, but she didn't dare look back. Behind her, she could hear the chaos. Shouts, footsteps, the sound of bodies hitting metal. Truong's voice echoed once more. "Go! Don't stop!" Tieu Nu ran through the maze of alleys until her knees gave out. She collapsed under a dim streetlight, gasping for air, soaked and trembling. The posters she carried were now a blur of wet paper clinging to her chest. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the rain. "Truong, what are you hiding from me?" she whispered. Moments later, footsteps splashed behind her. She turned, and there he was, breathless, bruised, but alive. He knelt beside her, gently touching her face. "You shouldn't have come looking for me." "Then tell me why," she cried. "Tell me what you've been running from. Who were those men? What deal?" Truong's eyes darkened. "I used to work for them. People who control things from the shadows. I thought I could escape, start over. But they don't let anyone go." He looked away, guilt etched across his face. "If they find out you're with me, they'll come after you too." Tieu Nu grabbed his hand, shaking her head. "I don't care. I looked for you every day, Truong. Through storms, through fear. I can't lose you again." He smiled sadly, brushing a strand of wet hair from her cheek. "You're still the same. Too brave for your own good." Before she could answer, the sound of approaching engines echoed down the street. Truong stood up, helping her to her feet. "We have to leave, now." "Where will we go?" "Somewhere they can't find us," he said quietly. "But first, I have to end this." Lightning flashed again, and for an instant, she saw the old Truong in his eyes, kind, determined, full of love. Tieu Nu took his hand. "Then we face it together." He nodded slowly. Together. But deep down, as thunder rumbled in the distance, she couldn't shake the feeling that the storm wasn't over. Not yet. The night was darker than ever, and the storm showed no mercy. Tieu Nu and Truong ran through the flooded streets, their fingers intertwined, hearts pounding in rhythm with the rain. Every shadow felt like danger. Every echo made them flinch. They finally stopped beneath an old bridge where the roar of the rain softened into a trembling whisper. Truong's chest heaved as he caught his breath. His clothes were soaked, his face bruised, but his eyes, Those eyes that Tieu Nu had dreamed of for years still carried the same fire. "Truong," she whispered, gripping his hand tightly. "We can run. We'll leave the city tonight. We'll disappear." He shook his head slowly. "If I run, they'll chase you forever. If I stay and end this, you'll be free." Her heart sank. "No, don't you dare say that. We'll face it together, remember?" Truong smiled weakly. "You once told me love was about protecting each other, no matter what. Let me protect you this time." Tieu Nu's tears mixed with the rain. "I don't need protection. I need you." Thunder rolled above them like the sound of fate itself. Truong reached into his pocket and handed her a small envelope. Damp, crumpled, but sealed with care. "If something happens to me," he said softly, "open this. It will tell you everything, my past, my promise." Her hands trembled as she took it. "Truong, don't." Before she could finish, headlights pierced through the rain. The same black car screeched to a halt at the edge of the bridge. The two men stepped out again, shouting over the storm. "It's over, Truong. You can't run." Truong turned to Tieu Nu one last time, brushing his thumb against her cheek. "No matter what happens, remember this. I never stopped loving you." Then he pushed her gently toward the shadows behind the bridge. "Go." "Truong, no!" she screamed, her voice breaking. But before she could reach him, the storm swallowed his figure, flashes of lightning illuminating his silhouette as he faced the men alone. A gunshot cracked through the thunder. Tieu Nu froze. Her breath caught. The world went silent, except for the rain. She fell to her knees, clutching the envelope against her chest, her tears vanishing into the storm. "Truong," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. Somewhere in the chaos, she thought she heard him, soft, distant, "Live, Tieu Nu." And though the storm finally began to fade, she knew her story was only just beginning.
Trong đêm mưa dữ dội, tiểu nữ lang thang khắp thành phố tìm Trường, người đàn ông yêu cô để mất liên lạc từ lâu. Khi Tường mọi thứ đã hy vọng vụt tắt, cô bất ngờ nhìn thấy một bóng dáng quen thuộc đứng giữa đám đông. Cuộc gặp gỡ tưởng chừng kỳ diệu dẫn đến sự thật tàn khốc. Trường bị truy đuổi bởi những kẻ bí ẩn liên quan đến một cuộc giao dịch nguy hiểm. Trong quá khứ, anh buộc phải đối đầu với họ để bảo vệ cô. Trong anh khác, định mệnh dưới cơn mưa xối xả, tiếng súng vang lên, họ chia cắt họ mãi mãi. Tiểu nữ ôm lá thư Trường để lại, nước mắt hòa cùng mưa, thề sẽ sống tiếp để giữ trọn lời hứa yêu thương ấy.